Every time I make one of these, I either learn something new, or something I would have learned gets patched by the time the video comes out. I learned using the Voltvessels Bola form in water doesn't give you the extra vertical hitbox the Spear form does, and that Flintslate can be used on Mount Fae to stall Frostbite. It doesn't reset it. It doesn't reset. It stalls the Frostbite. Stop. Stop typing. This is different. This is different. Welcome to Watch Mojo. If you like tools in the color red, then you're about to have the best day of your life. Number 24, the Needle File. Hey, let's do the FromSoft thing where we make a gimmick weapon whose singular purpose is to take out a boss in the game. But we're not going to tell you what boss it is. We're not going to tell you it's a gimmick tool. And we're going to let it one-shot plasmids. We're gonna make a whole enemy type based around HP restoration if you don't kill it quick enough. And then we're gonna give you a tool that's only good at killing just those enemies. This would be like if the broken straight sword in Dark Souls 3 somehow wrapped all the way around the game and you find out Slave Knight Gale used it to spread pimento on his sandwich one time. Actually, come to think of it, the broken straight sword might be a pretty apt comparison because every complaint I could levy against it would just get hard countered by a bunch of reminders of what the tool is actually there for. Well, I guess if even the game itself is trying to tell me where this one should go, I have no reason not to listen. So if you're itching for a gameplay loop as enthralling as scraping peanut butter off the roof of your mouth, just know this tool will be sitting at the very back of the bar trying desperately not to exist. Number 23, the Architect Silkshot. The only tool in the game to use your own silk as a power source in exchange for a shrug and a middle finger when asked what damage it can produce. The Forge Daughter variant is way better, and even that still sucks. Choosing who repairs the Silkshot locks you out of the other two options for the remainder of the game, and since your choice of tool here is permanent, it's a pretty glaring fault that both competing iterations have clear advantages over this one. The Forge Daughter must have installed a fucking belt feeder into the frame for all the rounds it can hold, and the Weaver variant pierces enemies and hits harder than a Tacks audit. Not even landing all 3 hits from the Architect measures up to the damage of the Forge variant, and that's with less ammunition. And it still demands silk because it's a silk tool. So what am I trading here? It's less ammo efficiency, less damage, takes away silk that could have gone to healing or using a skill, and a 3-shot burst means a small likelihood for one of the shots to outright miss completely. It has no bargaining power whatsoever. Number 22, the Rosary Cannon. Who else grabbed this weapon from high halls and immediately just thought, oh, this shit's gonna suck? Because why the hell wouldn't it? They locked the Hollow Point mod in a room with Dr. Faust from Devil May Cry until they fucked, gave it some of the coolest animations and sound effects in the game, and even snuck in a lore diss towards the Citadel with the concept of using something holy as a tool for violence. Want to know how it works? The capacity isn't affected by tool pouches or satchel. The shots pick randomly between 2 separate damage numbers, the lower of which gets almost no boost from crafting kits because it's so damn small. It rakes through your savings like a doctorate program. Pilot pouch is basically mandatory. Using the spray and pray to hit anything that's mid-flight feels like you're trying to trick shot your piss into the next stall over. And in its best situations, the cog wheel could have managed the same task in half the time with 1 use, but none of that matters. You want to know why? Because Hornet has a fucking Tommy gun, and Tommy gun mains don't concern themselves with the opinions of others. They will force that shit to work no matter what. Number 21, the Longpin. For all intents and purposes, it's a slightly shittier, slightly more awkward straight pin with a slightly more hilarious throwing animation. Like someone just loaded up longpin.png and slapped 2 keyframes on it and then collected a check. The undercrank enemies at the beginning of Act 2 sometimes tuck themselves underneath their shells when they back away from you, and I guess the Longpins are a good counter to enemies that do that, you know, as opposed to the more reliable, time-tested strategy of waiting for him to pop back out because this isn't peekaboo and I don't need my diaper changed. Also useful for bypassing the symbol shields the judges use on your way up the blasted steps. You know, all 2 of those guys. Yeah, these are pretty forgettable. Number 20, the Forge Silkshot. After looking at everything it offers, damage, capacity, even attributes of the more pointless variety like bullet speed and hitbox size, I have confidently arrived at the conclusion that the Forge Silkshot is a straight pin that requires silk. In other words, leave it the hell alone. I initially thought using tools like these with Architect Crest would have at least narrowed down what your silk is, you know, being dedicated to, therefore lessening the burden of using 1 silk strand just to fire the weapon, but it turns out I just made it even more awkward because the same silk you're expending with every shot is also used for the craft bind ability that reloads all your tools. If a tool can barely climb over the mountainous piles of damage handed out by the straight pin, maybe it's not yet at the point where it should start making demands. I get that it's called the Silkshot and that changing that mechanic would require a ground-up retooling of the entire weapon, and I'm asking for it anyways, because unless that happens, any variant of the Silkshot that isn't the Weaver is going to forever be accompanied by the nagging voice voice in the back of my head telling me that strand of silk could have went towards my next parry. Number 19, the throwing ring. Man, I hate putting this here because Chakra probably had the best side quests in the game, and for the payoff to be something as valuable as her signature weapon only to then find out they couldn't even measure up to tools you find at the beginning of the game, 14 damage is not a lot of damage. A lot of damage is in another galaxy right now. It is so far removed from a lot of damage that if it showed up to the front door, it would be considered an invasive species and shot on sight. But what sets it apart from its competition is its rebound potential that can bounce off one enemy and into another enemy. But it usually just ricochets off the wall you weren't aiming at, and then it decides to hit something. In layman's terms, it's a Conchcutter with aim labs installed. Using the taunt with the rings on changes your taunt animation, I think most people know that by now, but it also doesn't cost any silk and increases the rings damage by 50% instead of the needles damage, which I do think gives it an astronomically small amount of staying power just because of how unique it is. I've still had some pretty elegant takedowns with this thing when it actually does what it's supposed to, but the novelty of trick-shotting coins into a bucket wears off pretty quickly until all you're left with is a cool taunt button. And I'm gonna be real, it's still worth. Number 18, Voltvessels Bola form. I think it would have been cooler if you gave it the Bola icon initially and then let you transform it into a spear when you rested at a bench, because both of them are honestly fine, but strictly comparing the two of them, there is a very obvious loser in this arms race. The amount of times I've spiked one of these right into someone's face only for both orbs to head clear away from whoever I was aiming at, and they either explode too quickly for me to whack them again and reposition them, or they rebound in a spot too awkward for me to even reach in the first place. Skill issue? Oh, sure. You can say it's a skill issue as long as I get to say you can fix the issue by just using the damn spear. Even if the Bola form is capable of just barely more damage, it doesn't feel like the extra steps needed to get that damage is ever worth it. It'll always munch up sweaty fat fucks and big targets, but always misses against enemies my size or smaller. And that's just not a sacrifice you have to make when you can lightning stake the ground with spear form and just laser them both down. Number 17, the Curveclaw. When fully upgraded, it'll measure in at 10 damage for each repeated strike, but it'll only return significant damage if you're keeping an eye out for the Cuphead patented sweet spot that most enemies will almost definitely be away from by the time the tool actually gets to said location. Which, that's really not the disappointing part. You put in a bit of practice and it'll just be like sparring with old Briny Beard again. But the single hit damage on the Curveclaw is so low that it can only be worth if you're consistently hitting that sweet spot with it. Even if every single Curveclaw lands at least 2 hits on something, you still have a higher final damage ceiling with straight pins, in addition to straight pins just being much easier to land. That's also why I think the Curvesickle is one of the best upgrade items in the game, because it's not just a damage bonus, the projectile also has a wider hitbox, giving it a much cleaner sweep over that sweet spot area. Number 16, the Straight Pin. A time-tested staple in any arsenal. A pointy piece of metal with just barely enough aerodynamics to travel in a straight line. It's the okayest tool I've ever used in the game, so this is where it's going. It's as uneventful as a sidewalk on a September afternoon, and judging by the abundance of ammunition, I guess there's a Silksong equivalent of Da Feng Core Industry running around developing super weapons. Whiffing it just straight up just doesn't matter most of the time, because you always have another one on tap, and lobbing them out with even childlike forethought will almost guarantee a hit because the projectiles travel so fast, making it one of the most dependable tools in the whole game with 0 glaring proficiencies. It doesn't shine quite as brightly as Threefold in boss battles, but it's fast, you get a shitload of them, and if it were my only means of defense, then I guess I wouldn't feel completely helpless. Number 15, the Threefold Pin. A relatively straightforward tool you find relatively early into the game. It's a straight pin, but there's 3 of them now. Okay, well why the fuck can't I just hold 75 straight pins then? Never mind, I'm starting to think simple math might not be Team Cherry's strongest subject, or maybe they're too good at it, I haven't decided yet. All I know is that if the Architect Silkshot is a shrug and a middle finger to damage conventions, this tool is more like a physical assault in Chicago's dirtiest alley. The damage of each individual pin rapidly diminishes if multiple pins hit the same target. Want more about why this tool is ridiculous? Then go watch the misleading damage system video I uploaded a while ago. This means the quote correct strategy to squeeze out as much performance as possible from it is to use it in crowds, where it ideally hits for its top damage on 3 different enemies. This never happens. Also, aren't most of the tools supposed to like somewhat resemble a real-world item, since part of the fun is imagining how the bugs in your backyard turn a paperclip into a 3-bedroom home? These are just throwing knives. Like, these are literally just throwing knives. Number 14, the Pimpillo. When I first found it up in Greymoor, I was ready to spend the whole rest of the game using nothing but this. But the honeymoon, holy shit, look at that damage phase of the tool, wears off quicker than any other until it eventually became nothing more than a passive disappointment before just scrolling past it, trying desperately to remember an alternate timeline where it was actually dependable. In fact, you try so desperately that you send psychic damage directly to Team Cherry's offices, causing them to patch the game and buff the ammo capacity. No adjustment to actual performance from what I could tell, but it's hard to look at over 50 damage in a single explosion and immediately find something to bitch about. Force feed Grohl some of his just desserts and he becomes even more of a pushover, and you can use it to easily obtain the journal entry for the muck maggots. It's pretty nice. You can throw 10 of them now with Satchel. I would at least try it out. If it doesn't arc over shit like a basketball with an ulterior motive, it can do some pretty good damage. Number 13, the Weaver Silkshot. If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself. Without any contest or second thought, the Weaver is hands down the best Silkshot of the three, and I still don't prefer it that much because that silk still gets much better value if it's allocated towards a bind or a skill or a tactical reload if you're using Architect Crest. It doesn't even cost any rosaries to upgrade because you're just fixing it yourself without the help of any NPC, and you don't risk locking yourself out of it like with the Architect variant, and the Forge variant. Well, the Forge variant sucks balls too, fuck it. It pierces enemies, it shits on armor, it's not affected by gravity, and if the only drawback you have to worry about is a slightly worse wind-up time, then I'd say that trade-off is beyond fair. The only actually negative trade-off it shares with the rest of its type is the use of silk to enable it to fire, and the usage of silk in any tool is almost a guaranteed death sentence considering what else it can be used for. So if the Weaver Silkshot was able to climb this high with those ankle weights on, then goddamn, I'm impressed. Number 12, the Cogwork Wheel. Man, you used to get so many of these. Only 10 feels like not a lot. Not as much as it should be, at least. Any environment that involves a densely packed group of enemies, the wheel is magically good at dealing with, but against bullet sponges, bosses, and enemies of that variety, it just feels like there's a slightly better option waiting for me no matter what approach I take. Bosses like Second Sentinel fortunately take place in a room that enables cogwheel-related shenanigans, since it'll just Tony Hawk up the wall and start heading the other way, but this situation is way more particular than you'd think. Really, the only scenario where I would rather have this tool over anything else would just be the long hallways and coral chambers, with nothing but the road ahead and 3 to 5 dickheads conveniently sitting at the end of it. I'm not even mad at the damage. The damage feels great, but having only 10 instead of 16 now doesn't give it nearly the sustain it used to have in boss encounters and in large gauntlets. And whatever you're throwing it at has to be grounded to take significant damage from it. Even smaller enemies like pilgrims can apparently just jump over it while in the middle of taking damage, and they can just clear it. Like, it was absolutely fine where it was. Number 11, the Voltvessels Spear form. I'm not sure what to do with this one, to be honest. There's a lot of trickery. There's a lot of unseen strats to be employed with this one that I've really started to like doing. So throwing it in water detonates it immediately, just like the Bola variant, but if you're using the Spear variant, you get the vertical hitbox in addition to the horizontal spread that comes with it being in water, giving it 3 potential attack directions. If it's on the ground, you can smack it for a quick angle adjustment, so you not only have this massive vertical hitbox that deals a shitload of damage, but also a pretty comfortable control over where that hitbox can go. If you're just sticking it in the ground and hoping the shock damage lands where it should, then you're not actually using the spear. That's motherfucking lightning stake from DS3. You still only get 10 at max, 12 with Satchel, but if you know how to take advantage of all its little secrets, then I don't feel like you should be whiffing a lot of these. Number 10, the Plasmium Phial. The King's obsession with using buzzsaws as a security system made him a pretty hateable dude, but all his dissenters out here real quiet after we found out he was trying to save his kingdom from a fentanyl addiction. All it takes is one poke and then it snowballs from there until suddenly it's the only red tool you're even equipping anymore. It's really good in pretty much every situation, because every situation usually involves your ass taking damage to some degree. And when injecting it 9 times in a row, all your health gets replaced by regenerative lifeblood masks that will continue to regenerate all the way to full HP if you go long enough without taking damage. Fuck Mount Fae, and fuck whatever circus act the DLCs are gonna put us through. As long as you have this in a fucking corner to stand in, your ass is future-proofed. Number 9, the Snare Setter. I want you to download the Godhome mod, this one right here. Put your favorite crest on, only equip the snare, just go a couple rounds with a few different bosses and see if it's actually that hard to catch someone in the blast radius, because I'm hedging a bet here that it won't be as hard as you think. Keeping to the edges of Carmelita's arena are usually great spots because her second phase attacks have her spanning almost the entire width of the room, and so she's likely to spend her recovery time hanging out in the corner. Any boss with a ground pound attack becomes free real estate because you can just bait them into the blast zone, and even the true final boss has some holes in her positioning that allow you to just drop it in a very particular spot and secure an almost guaranteed hit. I sure hope there isn't some weird quest-dependent stipulation that prevents me from doing any of what I just said in practice, and that I have to give up the tool prior to entering the third act. Wow, I hope I don't have to fucking mod this in with a debug tool just to get footage of myself testing it out on different bosses, because that's the only way you're allowed to have it. If you're pissed right now, good. That is my mission. I want everyone to see how good this tool would have actually been in practice, because at least that gives us a shot of it being reimbursed in a future DLC. Number 8, Tacks. The Tacks proudly boasts some of the game's most incredible potential damage and also the most glaring weaknesses. I think one of its biggest hidden strengths is actually that of certainty. You can look at any boss's attack pattern and general strategy for no less than about 3 seconds and immediately know whether or not Tacks is going to help you out. A well-placed bundle of Tacks can be a tide turner against half the game's bosses and enemies, while being as threatening as a balloon in the Shittersville County Fair versus the other half. Look no further than the back of the box they came in for usage instructions. Deploy Tacks when the following is true. Enemy can't fly. Enemy traverses long horizontal distances. Enemy has a ground pound attack with a very predictable trajectory. Please avoid the usage of Tacks when enemy can fly or refrains from spending too much time at ground level. Enemy is stuck to ceiling. Floor is fucking gone, and many other instances where your adversaries are horizontally challenged. I eventually found that the gradual damage over time of your enemies footworking themselves into a hospital like they're trying to discover a bridge between boss fight and street performer actually added up quite a decent bit, but only when the territory allowed for it to happen. They're pretty much useless against Nihilith and Savage Beast Flies for obvious reasons, but the whole idea of them being Tacks sort of comes with that expectation. Number 7, the Cogfly. It's glowing womb, but the womb ain't glowing no mo. This womb is pissed off. Cogflies are the ultimate combination of brain-off behavior and unrestricted nuclear brute force. They are full minion, so as to say, it's a tool that does its own independent damage without you ever actually having to attack something yourself. This essentially takes things like spacing, movement, knowing what attacks to punish, and just flat out just nullifies the need to think about any of that shit. And the reason that's so strong is because that's like, well, 90% of the combat in this game. You only get 8 of them, but you can also do that thing where you set them up and then sit at a bench for the refill and then go after the boss, which that doesn't feel intended at all. Shit, that's probably gonna get patched now, god damn it. But as long as you have Polyp Pouch and the Architect's Craft Bind, you can outlast most Act 1 and 2 bosses by just staying alive. And that shit becomes insanely easy when you're allowed to ignore over half of what makes the game difficult in the first place. You're trading damage and stopping power for comfort, which is why the damage over time really isn't that great unless you have Pouch. Pouch makes a massive difference here because Cogflies attack at a rate that allows a couple of the poison ticks to deal its own damage in between attacks, but even then, it doesn't ever feel like it's helping so much that the damage starts competing with meta options. It's not a personal favorite of mine. I go for more proactive options like Drill and Conchcutter. I prefer actually playing the game I fucking paid for, but having it be the linchpin of an Architect build with Pouch feels so comfortable that it could deal a fraction of its current damage and still not be terrible. Number 6, the Conchcutter. This could be in the running for my own personal favorite tool in the game. It takes the fun utility of rebounds and trick shots from throwing ring and just torques it until its nipples fall off. Why did I write this? I'm leaving it in, who cares? It can clock up to 6 hits on the same enemy, and in tight spaces where you're getting swarmed, like in the High Hall's Gauntlet room, you could intentionally try to miss and it would still probably hit something. The bullet trajectory is also incredibly predictable since it's always tilted slightly down, so you can either low jump and spike it into someone's face, or you can bounce it off the floor and catch a more distant target with the rebound. I almost always run this with Quick Sling and Satchel if I'm in Steel Soul mode, because that rounds your capacity up to 20 in total, and the final damage for these is pretty nuts considering how easily they find a mark. It actually competes directly with Tacks in this regard, both of them measuring out to be 840 with Satchel plus all the upgrades. I used to think this tool was only good against fat boys and big targets, but that projectile slows down so noticeably when it hits something that even smaller enemies are very likely to take the full 6. Number 5, Sting Shard. I might use this more than any other tool in the whole video, and I feel so incredibly validated watching the public opinion of this little landmine just pierce the heavens like Gurren goddamn Lagann. Here's the deal with Sting Shard. The numbers lie to you. They lie, but they also tell the truth. They tell the truth when you're only scratching the surface level of Sting Shard's utility, and if you're a bit too invested in the numbers game, you leave yourself open to the mistake of downplaying their actual damage potential in practice. Here's the game plan. Toss out a shard right over an enemy, wait like barely a quarter second for the hitbox to become active, but not active enough to where the trap actually springs, and then just whack it. If done correctly, the trap will explode, and ideally the enemy over top of it will eat the full explosion, dealing 84 damage before defense calculation. If that sounds too complicated, then you can also just toss out 2 shards at once, and the first shard activating will likely trigger the immediate detonation of the second shard. So one goes off like normal, and the one after it explodes as though you hit it with something. This is one of the only legacy attacks that actually found its way from the first game into the second, so it winding up in the early game makes a lot of sense considering its familiarity, but a max quantity of 12 just doesn't feel like enough for it to be dependable, and I will say that is probably Sting Shard's one glaring negative. I wouldn't be caught dead down the back of the fridge saying this is better than Flintslate or Curvesickle, but when you know how to properly time your hits with when they become active, that damage burst is enough to outshine almost everything that the math might say is better. Number 4, Flea Brew. Tell me you're a beast main without telling me you're a beast main. I mean, I guess that's slightly misrepresenting. If you're trying to convince yourself the crit function on the Wanderer crest is worth building into because you looked in the mirror and thought you weren't delusional enough already, then Flea Brew can also be considered a prime necessity because you're essentially increasing your crit chance by 50%, not through the critical percent itself, but through sheer attack quantity. And using the word prime just threw me down a thought tangent of someone modding the game by changing the Flea Brew icon to a prime energy drink, so I guess that's where my time is going this afternoon. It's hard not to look at improved movement and attack speed and not immediately think this is the best tool in the game, because so many other effects are tied to how frequently you can just hit things. It's mostly looked as a healing helper for Beast Crest, but it also improves movement speed by around 35%, making it a wonderful pair for the anklets, and on the Reaper Crest, the attack speed increase can also be thought of as a silk regen tool, and not just for increased DPS. It can be one of the earliest tools you unlock because you only need to rescue 5 fleas to make it happen. Refills are offered to you by the caravan for 30 rosaries, making it entirely independent from shell shards and negating the need to grind for them, and you can even chuck the empty bottle at fuckers when you've exhausted your supply, and I think that's pretty fun. Number 3, the Curvesickle. Honestly, I like it. Nice and comfortable, wide hitbox, which means even on mobile enemies, I'm landing at least 2 to 3 hits with one use. It's not any different from the Curveclaw at all in terms of quantity or trajectory, but the damage uptick and wider hitbox make it twice as good as it was before. The amount of area control you have on shit that's either diagonally or directly above you feels way more comfortable than it did before. And I still have trouble deciding if it's more useful in boss encounters versus just taking out random flyers over your head when I'm running DoorDash orders. It kind of feels like it's good at both. It's enough damage to confidently replace your straight pins and throwing rings, and it's only a shame you can't really get your hands on it until Act 3, which means some of you probably didn't even know this was a thing. In fact, it's probably the most well-hidden tool in the game, since you can only get it by going to this room in Act 3 and hitting all the targets with a single Curveclaw. Then some little bitch comes and takes it from you, and if you thought to actually return to the room after sitting on a bench, then you'll find the upgraded Curvesickle waiting for you on a pedestal where he took it from you. So it's definitely one of those if you know sorts of tools. Number 2, Flintslate. Nerf it all you want, Club Strawberry, but not even a 100 sized downtick in damage is gonna stop me from slapping this on Architect and running everyone through with a power drill like Hornet just opened a fucking construction company. This tool has its ass gorilla glued to the seat of its throne and it ain't coming off. It is a percent based buff, so boosting it with crafting kits wouldn't really work, so I guess the next best thing they thought of was to just tie it to your needle level instead. And though this could have easily played to its detriment, I think it's really comfortable having a tool that's solely for improving needle damage and returns the same exact result no matter what. They could have just made each crafting kit extend the active time of the buff instead, same thing with Flea Brew I guess, but 60% of 8 is 4.8 seconds per upgrade, and having a 27 second damage buff by the time you're completely kitted out does sound a bit dumb, so that's forgivable, I suppose. It's also one of the only tools to my knowledge that stop your momentum in mid-air, sort of like Binding does, so that can be used for some 900 IQ level evasion evasion tactics during a tough boss. Flintslate is the tool for players who don't want to think about tools, and for a lot of players, that's everything you could ask for in a single item. Number 1, the Delver's Drill. It was already impressive enough that the drill somehow threaded itself through the nuclear disaster of nerfs that seem to hit just about everything else in the game lately, but the fact that you can get it reasonably early, the equally reasonable learning curve that forces you to realize just how frequently you happen to be directly above something, and the sheer supply volume the game gives you. All of these benefits are but mere dressings, flavor text, sugar-free condiments on the triple-stacked smackdown cheeseburger, the heaven-piercing apparatus that is this drill. Team Cherry, I'm just giving you a heads up. You may have spanked Architect's ass a little too raw back in the day, but we're gonna have some beef enchiladas if I catch you laying hands on my Black & Decker. Bitch, I've read all the patch notes, and my pattern recognition is good enough for me to feel partially responsible. So let's just say the drill suddenly disengaging against a player's own will when a boss gets bored hanging out underneath it is enough of a shortcoming, and we're just gonna move on. We're not gonna touch it, alright? That's enough. You are never gonna get the full 6 hits on an unstaggered boss of any strength. That's just not gonna happen. But that's also not how you use the drill. The secret to knowing the drill's worth is being aware of just how many chances it gives you to just flat out just fuck it up. You get 22 of these with Satchel on. You can afford to just whiff so many of these, and when I was solo testing each tool against different Act 3 bosses, I found myself either getting close to the final damage of other strongest tools in the game, or just surpassing them entirely. And that's from someone who managed to whiff at least 5 or 6 times. Imagine how good the numbers would be if I knew what the fuck I was doing.